Shalom, this is Jonathan Feldstein with the Genesis 123 Foundation. I'm very pleased to have today Major Elliot Chodoff, who's a reservist officer in the IDF, a political and diplomatic commentator, and just an all-around expert. And Elliot, I'm thrilled that you're joining us today for the Global Prayer for Israel, where we're specifically praying for the IDF. And as we're in the midst of a war now 7 months old, starting in Gaza, expanding in Lebanon. We've been attacked by Iran. What do we need to pray for the actual military success of the IDF?
Well, I think that it may seem trite, but victory is uh, something that I think many in the West, and including in Israel, is something that has come out of our lexicon and needs to go back in. Really, a prayer for victory, a defeat of our enemies. Um, this it sounds almost biblical, uh, but once upon a time, that's really how wars were fought. Instead of leaving, as we have in the past decade or so, decade plus, leaving Hamas and Hezbollah and our enemies in the field at the end of operations. So I would start with victory,
Okay.
uh,
What?
and
Go ahead.
no, and right behind that or along with it, at the minimum cost to us that you can. Anybody who's familiar with warfare, and I am, knows that there's no such thing as no cost warfare, but certainly there is a difference between the price you must pay and beyond that,
Yeah.
and and keeping it at keeping it to a minimum. Minimum tragedy on our part, the minimum soldiers killed and wounded, and as a result, the minimum number of families will suffer the loss and hurt to their loved ones.
Sure. You're off right now as we're speaking. You've served already. You were called up
Yeah,
earlier during the war. You know you're interacting with soldiers. You live in the north of Israel. Soldiers I'm interacting with when we've been going out and giving out winter jackets and food and all kinds of other things. You're seeing tremendous motivation, but I keep hearing from people that there's a sense that we, Israel, are standing alone. What do we need to do to pray for the soldiers themselves as they literally put their lives at risk, but they're away from their families and confronting life and death situations?
that they maintain their strength, mental and physical. Uh, it's I think another thing that we often take for granted. We think of soldiers as automatons. They're people, and they suffer from the fatigue and the pressure and the stress of combat, of being in the military in general, and of being away from home and family and loved ones, and all of these things weigh on soldiers. Uh, and the longer it takes, and we've been at it now for 6 months, uh, it's incremental. In other words, maintaining high motivation is something that is not to be taken for granted. So I would say again, their physical and mental well-being beyond the what I talked about earlier, the cost of war, of combat itself, but the negative effects of being in a war and in the military, not necessarily specifically in combat.
Yeah, thank you. And let's talk for a minute about their families. When you, for instance, were called up, when my son-in-law, they left behind spouses and children
Yeah.
and business and work and what have you. As we're speaking, close to 300 soldiers have been killed, which means over 100 widows and hundreds of orphans. What do we need to be praying for their families, for the people who were left behind?
Also, for their strength, physical and mental, being able to, sometimes with all the difficulty about being in the military, sometimes it's easier to be there than to be home, worrying about your loved one who's there and you haven't heard from. Uh, we we now finally, I say this because something that I advocated for years: take away soldiers' cell phones for all sorts of good security reasons. And but one of the negative effects, if you will, is that they're not in constant contact with their families, and that leaves a great deal of worry behind. That also to praying to ease that, and that ultimately the all the messages that come from the front will be good news, or as
Yeah,
much as possible.
excellent. Thank you. Elliot, before we finish, anything we didn't cover that you're
No,
speaking now to thousands of people, Jews and Christians all over the world. What else do we need to know?
no, I think that's it. As I said, victory, um, well-being, low cost, and strength at home to be able to withstand all of this.
Awesome. Elliot, Major Elliot Chodoff, thank you for taking time for your insight today and for helping us focus our prayers.
Always a pleasure.